The rain came down in sheets that November evening, turning the city streets into rivers of forgotten dreams and broken promises. Marcus stood under the flickering streetlight, his cardboard sign sagging in his trembling hands, watching another well-dressed couple hurry past without meeting his eyes. He'd become invisible somewhere along the way. When exactly, he couldn't say. Maybe it was after the factory closed, or when his savings dried up, or perhaps the day his daughter stopped returning his calls. The exact moment didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that in a city of 8 million people, he had never felt more alone, until her. She appeared like a whisper in the storm, a small figure moving against the tide of umbrellas and turned-up collars. Marcus noticed her because she was the only person walking slowly, looking at faces instead of phones. She couldn't have been more than 9 or 10, wearing a bright yellow raincoat that seemed to hold all the sunshine the gray sky had stolen. She stopped 3 feet away from him, her dark eyes studying him with an intensity that made him want to look away. "Are you hungry?" she asked, her voice cutting through the rain's percussion. Marcus opened his mouth, but shame caught the words in his throat. He nodded instead. The girl reached into her backpack and pulled out a sandwich, still wrapped, and a small carton of orange juice. "My mom always packs too much," she said, extending her hands toward him. "I can't eat it all anyway." It was a lie told with such grace that Marcus almost believed it. His hands shook as he accepted the food, not from cold, but from the sudden weight of being seen. "Thank you," he managed, his voice hoarse from disuse. "I'm Sophie," she said, smiling up at him through the rain. "What's your name?" "Marcus." It had been so long since anyone had asked. "Nice to meet you, Marcus." She said it like he was someone worth meeting, like he was still a person and not just part of the urban landscape. "I come this way every Tuesday and Thursday after my piano lessons. I'll see you around, okay?" Before he could respond, she was gone, swallowed up by the crowd, leaving only the warmth of her kindness and the sandwich in his hands. True to her word, Sophie appeared every Tuesday and Thursday. Sometimes she brought food, sometimes just stories about her day, her best friend Emma's new puppy, her struggles with fractions, her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. Marcus found himself looking forward to those brief visits. Began making sure he was clean-shaven on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Stood a little straighter when he saw that yellow raincoat approaching. "My mom says everyone has a story," Sophie told him one evening, settling onto the curb beside him despite the cold. "What's yours?" So Marcus told her. About the wife he'd lost to cancer. The engineering job that had been his life's work until the layoffs came. The apartment he couldn't afford anymore. The daughter who couldn't bear to watch her father fall apart. He told her about his mistakes, his regrets, the 1,000 small defeats that had led him to this corner. Sophie listened the way children do when they haven't yet learned to judge, to categorize, to dismiss. When he finished, she simply said, "That's really sad, but you're still here, Marcus. That means your story isn't over yet." Winter arrived with its bitter teeth, and Marcus worried about Sophie walking alone in the dark, though she always assured him her mom's office was just around the corner, and they walked together to the subway. On Christmas Eve, Sophie brought him a care package, hand warmers, thick socks, a thermal blanket, and a card she'd made herself. Inside, in careful cursive, she'd written, "To Marcus, the kindest person I know. Love, Sophie." Marcus wept that night, the card pressed against his chest, feeling something he'd thought was dead inside him stir back to life. Hope, maybe, or purpose. Whatever it was, it burned warm enough to fight back the cold. January brought the turning point. Sophie arrived one Thursday afternoon unusually quiet, her usual chatter replaced by worried silence. "What's wrong?" Marcus asked, alarmed. "It's my mom," she said, her voice small. "She's sick. Really sick. She needs an operation, but the insurance won't cover all of it. And there's not enough money. And," her voice broke, tears mixing with the light snow beginning to fall. Marcus felt his heart crack open. This child, this beautiful soul who had given him so much, needed help, and he had nothing to give. He was a man living on a street corner with nothing but a backpack and a shopping cart. What could he possibly do? That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He stared at the stars visible between the buildings and thought about what Sophie had told him once. Everyone has something to give. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's time, Sometimes it's just being nice to somebody who needs it. The next morning, Marcus did something he hadn't done in years. He walked into the public library, cleaned himself up in the bathroom, and sat down at a computer. He created an account on a crowdfunding website, his fingers fumbling over keys he'd almost forgotten how to use. He titled it simply, "Help Save Sophie's Mom." He wrote about a little girl in a yellow raincoat who saw him when no one else would, who fed him when he was hungry, who reminded him that he was human when the world insisted otherwise. He wrote about the power of small kindnesses and the ripple effects of seeing people instead of looking through them. He wrote until his hands cramped and his eyes blurred, pouring 3 months of gratitude into words. Then he did something that terrified him more than any night on the streets. He went to every corner, every park, every subway station where he knew others like him gathered. He showed them the page on the library computers, told them Sophie's story, asked them to share it however they could. With the social workers who checked on them, with the church volunteers who brought meals, with anyone who would listen. The response started slowly. $20 here, 50 there. But something about the story, a homeless man trying to help the child who'd helped him, struck a chord. Local news picked it up. A journalist wrote an article. Someone shared it on social media, and it went viral. Within 2 weeks, the campaign had raised over $200,000. Marcus stood in the hospital lobby, his knees weak, hardly believing he was really there. He'd been so worried that Sophie's mother would be angry, would think he'd exploited her daughter's kindness. Instead, when Sophie saw him, she ran into his arms, crying and laughing at once. "You did it," she sobbed into his shoulder. "You saved my mom." "No," Marcus said, his own tears falling freely. "You saved me first." Sophie's mother, Sarah, recovered fully from her surgery. But the story didn't end there. It transformed. Sarah, a human resources professional, used her connections to get Marcus into a transitional housing program. She helped him reconnect with his daughter, Lisa, who had her own regrets about the distance that had grown between them. The leftover funds from the campaign were used to create a foundation supporting homeless, individuals with job training, and mental health services. Marcus eventually found work again. Not as an engineer, those bridges had burned, but as a peer counselor, helping others navigate the path from homelessness back to stability. He was good at it, perhaps because he understood that the distance between housed and unhoused was shorter than most people wanted to believe. Everyone was just a few bad breaks away from the street, just as everyone was a few acts of kindness away from redemption. 2 years later, Marcus stood in the community center that bore Sophie's name, the Yellow Raincoat Project, watching as Sophie, now 12, cut the ribbon at its opening. She'd grown taller, but her smile was the same, still bright enough to light up the darkest corner. "I didn't do anything special," Sophie said when reporters asked her about inspiring the center. "I just shared my sandwich." Marcus did all the hard stuff, but Marcus knew better. Sophie had done something far more difficult than raising money or organizing programs. She had seen him. In a world that had learned to look away, she had stopped and looked directly at another human being's face. She had recognized his humanity when he'd almost forgotten it himself. That's what heroism really looks like, Marcus thought, watching Sophie laugh with the other children at the ceremony. Not grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but small, consistent acts of recognition. Seeing people, acknowledging their existence, offering what you have, even when it's just a sandwich and a conversation. As the crowd dispersed and the evening light painted the room gold, Sophie found Marcus in the corner where he'd been standing, watching it all with wonder. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. Marcus smiled down at the girl, who had changed his life by simply treating him like a person. "I'm thinking about how you taught me that we're all just walking each other home. And sometimes, the smallest person in the rain can be the biggest light in the darkness." Sophie hugged him tight. "I'm glad I met you that day, Marcus." "Me too, Sophie, me too." Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, but inside, the warmth of human connection, of kindness given and returned, of lives transformed by the simple act of caring, created a shelter that no storm could ever touch. Because in the end, that's what saves us, not grand gestures or perfect solutions, but the willingness to see each other, to stop in the rain, to share what we have, to recognize that every person, no matter where they are or how far they've fallen, deserves to be called by their name. Her name was Sophie. His name was Marcus. And between them, they proved that humanity's greatest power isn't in building walls or armies or empires, but in building bridges, one small act of kindness at a time.